Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for the invitation, and it's always a pleasure. So I'm happy to be here. By the way, the topic, as you just, let's say, heard, is, I think, one of the most interesting development in Europe, not for the good, of course. I'm less optimistic and less, let's say, considering that it's a business as usual, but I will give you my personal views as we go on. I think it's the second time I intervene on Brexit. Last time we knew much less, and now so we're more at the time of making some sort of speculation. We are still largely in the dark, but I think the more we go on, the clouds are really leaving some space for some light or some better understanding of how this is really shaping. Now, what I'm trying to do is, of course, not repeat what Christos just introduced, but rather, I think our understanding was to give you a different perspective. When I go to London, I always hear the London-based, and I always say, but there are two parties in the negotiation. If you don't, and the debate until now has been really driven by the UK perspective, because it's their will, it's their, let's say, priority for making the best deal, as Mrs. May is saying every single day, and the fact that from the European we are, let's say, it takes more time to get to what we want. We have to create the bodies, we have to create consensus of what is the policy negotiation guidelines. So we heard some voices here and there, but how much reliability there were on the fact that these voices were the real, truly European positions. I think that nobody was really betting on the fact that, and some of these were really driven and are still driven by contingency or political issues, and they may change over time, and by the way, also by over the speakers. So the opportunity of bringing another perspective that, say, drove my intervention to bring more the number one, the European perspective. So we heard more the UK. So what changes from the perspective of the UK banks? Now what changes from the EU perspective? And also the more operational or business implications on what the expected costs and disruptions may be emerging out from Brexit. And I will develop, let's say, three different let's say, parts of my presentation. First, to understand where we are on the Brexit negotiations, and also to have some better understanding of what Brexit means as such. The second is to give you an understanding of the impact on Brexit for the financial firms. And again, not necessarily on banks. I think that the question before alluded also to the fact that there are different legislations. I try to understand what are the most impacted across the financial sector, not just banks, okay? Knowing that there is a variety, and the topic of these 2 days are capital market union. It is not necessarily driven by the banking, pure banking, let's say, prudential supervision topics. And the third is, and here I will go probably a little bit more rapid, because Christos already made some points that I fully share on the impact on financial supervision. So we will have some QA time at the end, but given the topic, if there is something that is not necessarily clear, sometimes it's not clear to me also, please raise your hand, and we try to discuss and elaborate a response together. Okay, the first point is what Brexit means. And last time I started the introduction with Brexit means Brexit, that basically doesn't mean anything. And now I don't have a better answer, because we know that the additional sentence in the UK is whatever it takes, and better no agreement than a bad deal. But again, it's process-oriented. I would say also it's outcome-oriented, but we don't know what the outcome is. So I think it's basically, so far, the negotiator have an obligation of means, not of results. Because if you look at the results, it's the best deal, but without knowing what the terms of the deal are, I think it's an obligation of means. That's why it's very important that the conditions for the negotiation have been started, been discussed, and I will get back to this in a minute. But I think that it is not business as usual. It is one of the major break in the European construction, number one, and in the day-to-day functioning of the financial sector. Having said this, I will get back to this. I believe that there will not be a big shift out from London. Potentially there will be shift out to other, let's say, international financial centers, not necessarily in Europe. There will be some relocation of partial or marginal business across Europe, but that is not, generically speaking, affecting the strength of the city as an international financial center, and also the leading financial center in Europe. Now, the trigger point from the perspective of the formalities is, of course, the vote, and on the 29th of March, the fact that just by, let's say, the deadline, as was anticipated, the letter sent by the Prime Minister to the Council, and these, according to Article 50, as you know, triggered the start of a negotiation and the intention to withdraw. It's an intention to withdraw. Interestingly, the treaty gives the opportunity to withdraw, but not to withdraw the application to withdraw, or not withdraw the notification to withdraw. So now we are in a tunnel that is a blind tunnel, no light, until when we will get more closer to the end of probably next year, to the close of the 2 years, but you cannot get back, okay? So there is no security or rescue exit. It's like this. I think it's a little bit strange that, for instance, consider the political will. There are general elections in the UK shortly in June. Consider what is not expected, but with general election you never know recently, that the Labour Party wins, and the Labour Party imagine that campaigns for revoking the Brexit, and what would happen? Nothing, because in reality you cannot exit this tunnel according to the European institutional, let's say, settings, as it is seen now. So we are entering, as I said, into a negotiating, let's say, process that would take maximum of 2 years, according to Article 50, unless the two parties, and particularly from the Council, from the European Union, the Council decision to extend this period by an additional time. That is unknown. There will be unanimity, of course, and again, here is another. I think that everyone knows that it's very tight. It's very difficult to get there on time. Does anyone know whether there will be the need for an extension? I think that nobody knows. If you go to London, they are not caring much on the 2 years. They're looking at the transitional period. Their most important objective is to get, particularly for the financial sector, an extension of the transition arrangements to cope with the magnitude of the earthquake. Okay, And I will get back on this point. The response from the European Union has been no transition arrangements on top of the negotiations. Okay, so there is this ping pong that has always been to be kept in mind to really understand what the two parties want. I come back to the second and third point in a minute, but just to continue on these, where we are. This is the timeline. So the UK notification, as I said, the 29th of March. The Council agreed on the guidelines. I will come back to these. There have been 2 days ago the Commission recommendations to start the negotiation for Council decision. And then you have this period of 18 months where people start talking, okay? I will tell you how this is working. And then by autumn 2018, wrap up and potentially get into some shape of the agreement, including, of course, the involvement of the European Parliament. And finally, if everything goes as it should, that is this official timeline, by March 2019, the exit of the UK from the European Union. Now, where we are as of now, knowing that I had to review this slide yesterday night, as of now, as of this morning, on the European position. I said the European position is taking shape. As I said, it took time. It couldn't start before the formal trigger, before the formal letter received. So you start preparing the troops, but then you go on the grounds only when the war is declared. So they had to wait until the 29th of March. Okay? And in 1 month, a lot has been done. Of course, has been prepared before. What has been done? First, the European Commission has been indicated and nominated as a single negotiator. It's an important point. Again, the same point as we were discussing for the WTO before, is a joint and a single representation of the joint and the entire universe interest of the European Union by appointment of the Commission on behalf of the Council as a union negotiator. Look at the name, union negotiator. So for the entire, let's say, union. Then you have to, what does it mean, the European Commission? You have to go down by one level of identifying, let's say, an organization and names. The organization was a task force, and Michel Barnier, former commissioner, has been identified as the chief negotiator. There is a deputy and there is an organization in this task force. The third one is the European Commission is empowered but cannot do it alone. Exactly as for WTO, there is a working committee in the Council that leads the discussion for empowering the Commission to negotiate on behalf of the Union. That is exactly the same process. So a new working party will be, a working group will be identified and will be set up in the coming days at the level of Council that will discuss regularly with the chief negotiator how the Commission intends and how the Commission is pursuing the mandate given to negotiate on behalf of the Union. And separately, the European Parliament will receive reporting. So the two other European institutions are involved in order to be fully informed and to have the opportunity to interact with the European negotiator, the representative of the European Commission. In this context, we cannot deny, I've been very careful of how to draft the second bullet point on top, that the general elections in the UK create an element of they disturb a little bit the context. There have been already, say, allegations of, you are entering to my politics. I hope that we're not getting to a point of Turkey and with the Netherlands, but the issue is that whatever you say it may be interpreted as somebody's campaigning in the UK in favor or against a certain political, let's say, positions that may influence the results of the general elections. So again, I think as Christos, I'm not doing politics, is simply to say that this start that should have been, as always, you go fast in the very beginning to understand in the negotiation the enemy's intention. I think naturally it will be slowed down. And it's a strange situation because normally in the negotiation, it's the start where you are really trying to go and kick the enemy and sit and say put some certain very strict conditions and then you start negotiating. And here probably it is not going to happen because from one side you can say that this mandate can change. From the other side there will be allegation you are influencing by general election. So that is unfortunately a very bad context element. Now, what are the implications in terms of the individual steps? The Parliament adopted a resolution on the 5th of April. The Council unanimously, I think it was really a 10-minute discussion from what I heard, opened the point, closed the point after, let's say, a few interventions on the 29th of April of the guidelines for the negotiations. Again, there was a lot of preparation, but this gives you the understanding of how, at this stage, on these key principles, there is unanimity of the approach by the 27, let's say, member states. What are these about? Number one, phased approach, okay? There are 3 phases, from what I understand, but the priority is to understand how to conduct an orderly withdrawal, okay? So the first point is how the UK is exiting, okay? The second one is what will be the future relationship. 2 different concepts. The first, how do you pull out? The second, how you are bringing a new relationship with somebody who is out, okay? Second one, exit. The second one, first one, exiting. The second one is how you are treating your new neighbor, okay? And the third one is the transition agreement. And as I told you before, the transition agreement, the UK wanted to operate, to have an early agreement on these just to reassure the financial sector, particularly the city, and I think that they are going nowhere on this position, I think rightly so. Second point is that I already mentioned the union maintains unity, so there is no differentiation across Europe. I will get back to the particular points on the supervisory authorities and supervision on these, but the unity is I think it is the key word here. The third is that be ready, and that is the mirror from what Theresa May is saying, better having no agreement than a bad deal. And we start hearing from different voices, please be prepared to the fact that there may be no agreement. So if the negotiation were to fail, we have to be prepared to handle this situation. What is the bottom line? Christos told us before, it's the GATS and WTO. The fourth point is that, and I think that is the constructive part, and I fully agree on this, okay, you show the muscles, but then ultimately, what are our interests? Is that to keep the UK as a future close partner, okay? And particularly in financial sector, on the basis of what we just said, the recognition of the fact that London will remain the leading European, not EU, international financial center, and we have to, let's say, come up with a practical agreement that would make them a close partner. The fourth, or the fifth, sorry, is they preserve the integrity of the single market, so no sector-by-sector approach. and I would say no cherry picking. At the very beginning, I think there was an idea of let's have the benefit of a single market, but among the four, let's say, fundamental rights, we select one against the other. No, this doesn't work. And I think that in the UK now they're recognizing this. And the last point is that there is the single package negotiating mood. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So at the very last minute, and I'm pretty sure of that on the, I don't want to say the 29th of March 2019, but as you know, the final deal is really in the last hours, the long negotiation to have the final package agreed. Okay? That is the position of the Council. The European Commission, now empowered, adopted a recommendation to open the negotiation. A couple of days ago, it was disclosed yesterday in the website. And very last point, this is the open box. The European supervisors are also discussing what to do. Okay? And here we start, let's say, taking some pills. There are no position, no formal position, but I know that there have been speeches. Yesterday there was an interesting workshop at the European Central Bank, a technical workshop for preparing for Brexit. And I think that I wanted to give you 4 or 5 points that have emerged during the discussion, and particularly the vice chair of the supervisory board set the tone of what the ECB position as the banking supervisor in the euro area is preparing for Brexit. Number one is, and I anticipate something I will mention a little bit later. In the uncertainty, and I think that we are in a very uncertain context, there is a key guiding principle for the supervisors, that is risk management. Risk management is a method to mitigate or manage uncertainty. You don't know what is going on. So from the prudential supervisor, what do you expect? Manage the risk. And as an advisor, I've been approaching this as the very beginning as it is a risk management exercise. And I'm happy to see that also the supervisors, as natural, they're managing these from this exactly the same perspective. So, number one, take the worst case scenario. That is, there is no deal, and what is going to happen. So don't make your plans on the best ideal scenario. Passport, transition arrangements, equivalence, blah, blah, blah. There may be no agreement. So what is going to happen? And take your, let's say, plans, transition plans, not necessarily driven by these, but taking into account, okay, in terms of the risk management. The second, don't wait. It's a long and complex issue. Don't wait until March 2019. It will be too late, in the sense that there are complex issues, I will get back in a minute, that need to be addressed as soon as possible. And I think that any regulator across Europe, across the 27, are available to engage in a sort of informal discussion to address and facilitate the joint understanding. I think the regulators are also trying to understand how to cope with this, and they're willing, let's say, to engage in a genuine discussion. Third point, unity. I said before, here the message is the same standards, so no race to the bottom, okay? But when I read these no race to the bottom, it is clearly, I'm quoting from Susanne Lerstrasser from the supervisory board. I asked myself, what does it mean? The banking union is already a concept that has no race to the bottom. It's standardized by definition. The ECB for the significant banks and the SSM provides already a framework whereby there should not be different treatment or disparity of implementation. So is the ECB giving a signal to the non-euro area? That is a question mark. I don't know. And Christos previously predicted certain banks would go to the non-euro Copenhagen, and he was mentioning these. I doubt. But I was really surprised to hear that yesterday in Frankfurt, the ECB supervisor, the vice chair, said no raise to the bottom and same standards. They are implementing their standards, so by definition. So, okay, keep in mind that there may be something at European level for which the ECB has not necessarily responsibility, but is looking at. So Christos may be right from this perspective. Fourth point, and I get to the point that was raised in the previous discussion, no shell companies. So if you are going to locate your continental business, I will get to these later in my presentation, because you have to establish a subsidiary, as Christos told us. Please keep in mind that the ECB, but I think that the other supervisors as well, are not accepting shell companies or letterbox entities or whatever you want to call. And they really mentioned, I want a real bank, okay? And they gave very concrete examples. Local risk management, to the point that was raised before. I will get back to these. Sufficient local staff. Nobody will tell you how many persons do we need, what specific functions, but these are clear indicators of expectations, okay? Third, operational independence. Now, what does it mean? Can you outsource? Can you not? What critical functions can you outsource? But again, keep the tone in mind. Fourth point, not permanent and full back-to-back. Okay, that is the key question for banks and for capital markets activities, okay? All what we are talking about largely is transactions in the markets, particularly derivatives and particularly, let's say, secondary markets activities. Now, one of the idea for banks relocating, okay, I establish a subsidiary, I have a passport, I enjoy let's say, the rights of a passport, establishing myself in Frankfurt or wherever. And then to minimize the disruption, I conduct a sort of back-to-back, so mirror with my limited company in London, okay? So the limited company in London continues to be my hub for the European-wide activity in the markets, being their risk management, being their capital, being their all the arrangements. The ECB yesterday gave a strong message that no permanent and full back-to-back. We want to reduce over-reliance and too reliant exposure on a company or on an entity that is outside my control, that is outside the European, that is outside the euro area, okay? That is an important point, and that I was honestly surprised. I was hoping that some back-to-back, let's say...
How can they enforce
it's a matter of they have to approve, they have to license new entities. Whether it is branches, I am more optimistic about branches. If you want to do business in the single jurisdiction, the branches, of course, by third country would not enjoy passport. But subsidiaries, they will have to be licensed by the ECB, for instance. So we know it's a joint process with the national authorities. And at that moment, they will clearly stop with a business model, with a program of operation, with, let's say, the construct of the business model. They can say, no, you are over-relying on your head office in London. And this is not going to work. We are not granting the license. So I think that the license is really the entry door, or the approval of the internal models is really the entry door for preventing these kind of arrangement. And then, of course, yes, the next step was exactly the license and the internal model approval. They said it takes time and no explicit or no reliance on the grandfathering. So we will hear what the FCA in London and what the PRA will tell us about their supervisory approaches on, I don't know, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, or whatever, but we are conducting our own approval, okay? And by experience, some of these activities are taking really years to get an internal model approved. And last point, that is also a large surprise to me, the ECB is conscious of the fact that the consolidated supervision, they have powers to supervise the banks, but not business, when I say largely is market business here, not business conducted by investment firms. So they are advocating through a reform of the CRR, the future reform, advocating of calling on consolidated supervision at group-wide level. Okay, that is another important message that we heard yesterday in Brussels. So again, take into account that, particularly from the perspective of why you're here, that beyond the European institution, the European supervisors are also engaging with the financial sector to really discuss these concrete and very important operational aspects that would really drive the choice for the financial sector. Now, I will go very rapid on certain of the other topics that Christos already introduced. So again, here is I try to understand what hard and soft means, and I try to put it in a way. I come to the same conclusion as Christos, so I will get very rapid on this, but I exclude that the EEA is a potential opportunity, but I don't think it is politically viable. So this is not working. The EFTA as well. So what remains, and here we have in the slide, you have a much elaborated, let's say, analysis. What remains, I think, is likely a bespoke bilateral agreement that would set the tone and the framework for the future relationships, okay? But bear in mind, that is, the first one is really where we land. The next one, sorry, the next one is really how we will construct the future relationship. But bear in mind, as I said before, that this is the second step, this is the second phase. The first phase immediately is to understand how we are disentangling the UK from the rights and obligation perspective. And here is the second phase of how we are reconstructing the future relationship, okay? Just to put in the context of what I said before. So, having set the context of where we are on the Brexit, let's go, and already I introduced some important elements on what are the impacts for the financial firms in a more systematic way, okay? And here, just a few words of introduction. So go back to page 2, sorry, the second pillar. I think that all firms, and again, all firms, we're not just talking about the UK or the Japanese or the US. These are in the spectrum, these are potentially the most exposed. We are talking also about the EU continental firms. All firms will have to review, let's say, their operations, because the assumption is that the passport will not work anymore. So this is driving to a situation of large uncertainty. I mentioned that the best approach is managing the risk approach. And there are different analyses that have been conducted on the impact assessment. Is my business sufficiently important to, let's say, shift certain operations in continental Europe? Yes or no? And for instance, am I doing just commodities? Probably I don't have to, or with which clients? Probably if I'm doing commodities, I will likely remain in London because the business of commodities will likely remain in London. So again, it is not an analysis that is done automatically for all. It is a line by line, entity by entity, depending on not just its business model, not just the client, not just the activity, but is also getting down at the level of what kind of commodities, what kind of derivatives, what kind of, is it euro clearing, not euro clearing, I will get back to this. So it's a very complex analysis to understand the impact that financial firms are suffering. And of course, once you have determined that, yes, I'm impacted, yes, I need to preserve for profit and loss reasons, profitability, I need to preserve this business, I have to relocate. Then you start understanding or analyzing what kind of, let's say, what kind of implication you have in terms of location, in terms of internal restructuring of your business. Now, this is, in page 7, you have a sort of heat map, okay? And let's start with the business location. So clearly the most exposed you see on the far right are the ones, the Japanese and the UK and the US, okay? So why take the Japanese? I don't want to name any specific bank, but largely these, or the Brazilian, whatever, these banks have established themselves in London and from London as a portal for the entire Europe. So again, enjoying the benefit of a passport, you don't have to replicate as many presence across Europe. With light offices, if any, light offices of sales, so commercial people with boots on the grounds, but with little, let's say, operations as support activity. So these entities are by definition the ones that are most affected. Then you have the others that they have also large operations, and they can really shift things around. We hear from time to time HSBC, we are relocating 7,000 people to Paris. They have one of the, nobody says that HSBC in France is already one of a significant bank. So for them, we're talking about 7,000 people, something like this, but is an internal reallocation. It is not a major restructure. It is not a major implication from the regulatory perspective. It's an internal reallocation of people, I would say, or some business. So we have to distinguish between firms and what this means. And there are certain activities that are really low affected. The UK retailer that is providing business, or the Sparkasse in Germany that is really doing business just in Germany, there will be little impact on Brexit. Or the UK retailer will remain to do business just in Birmingham and will continue to be regulated by the FCA, by the PRA, or whatever else, and will be less affected. So this spectrum is something that it's an important element of consideration. The second element of the spectrum is, and I think Christos alluded, and this is the deep analysis that probably he has been doing for the Parliament. There is not a common answer. We know that the individual, you said piecemeal, I come to the equivalence in a minute, but basically the provision of a single market across the acquis communautaire is not standardized. Okay, we have the general principles of the freedom of the treaty, establishment, provision. We know these. But if you go to look and read the individual provisions, you see a lot of fine-tuning. And that is exactly where the analysis should be pay attention at the specificities of the different regulatory pillars and the different activities. There are certain activities that are cross-border by definition, online banking, the online activities, or the trading, but other activities that are unlikely to be cross-border. So again, is a matrix, as you see here, from the regulatory and business activity. And the point is, of course, passport is expected not to remain. So what is the proxy? Is equivalence, okay? We have been discussing already. I fully share what has been said before, that this is complex, piecemeal, there is not a single approach. There are nonetheless certain, I would say, standardized practices. At the time of CRR and ESMA, I contributed to identify certain frameworks. What does it mean? For instance, it is not a word-by-word analysis. It is an outcome-based, and it works. It works notwithstanding the fact that there is a technical and a political brick. Okay, the European Commission, what I call is, it puts on top a political, let's say, analysis, but the first is a technical analysis conducted by the European authorities, jointly with, of course, also on behalf of the national authorities. So the process is already there. To come back to the question that you put, honestly, I don't think, I know that there are important discussions. It's really strange now to come back to say, okay, we put certain rules that should be equal to everyone, and now we are rediscussing these because they apply to the UK. I found, honestly, a little bit strange. And I would also consider that the UK, having implemented by definition all these rules, how can you determine as day one that the UK is not equivalent? Okay? Now, then, if you want to make life more difficult, because there is a sort of political understanding, we know that we cannot say reciprocity, but how much reciprocity has been used as a political, let's say, red flag with some important partner of the EU. So if we want to do this, I think it's a little bit strange. That is my own perspective. So the rules are the rules. Let's stick to the rules. I don't think that the rules were simply made for Bangladesh, or if I look at the CRA, they have been working for any great or Emir or FMD. So it is not. Is it possible that this is not working also for the UK? Why not? I know that the implication would be difficult and they are discussed, but I think that we should rather stick, say, to the rules before reconsidering now on how to review this. So there is an element of, I said, of addressing the rules, but there is also an element of addressing the business model, okay? And in looking at costs and opportunities, there are costs if you have to relocate, if you have to undergo to important restructuring of how you organize your business, but there are also important opportunities. The firms that intend to relocate in Dublin or in other jurisdictions, they do also to take benefit of potential cost savings. And that is, it's an opportunity. You are not doing this unless there is a big bang that really triggers these discussions. And there are different factors. I tried here to identify: conduct, prudential, operational, and other support functions. that would have to be discussed in order to identify whether these opportunities would have to be taken in relocating or what relocating. But generally speaking, for instance, if you take the ECB position of not allowing back-to-back, certain of these opportunities will not work. So these opportunities work provided that the supervisory approach on outsourcing and on establishing new operation against the principle of the shell company, of the empty box entity, would really allow for it. Okay, but that is an open discussion that is not yet concluded. Last point on the impact, and then I conclude with some let's say, remarks on the financial supervision. We already alluded to the fact that London would remain probably so the Europe major financial center, but nonetheless there are areas where the disruption is expected to be important, okay? And it's important to be conscious about this. The first is Euro clearing. There have been a couple of days, 3 days ago, an important leak in the press about a position that is emerging at the European institutions on how to preserve, let's say, the responsibility of the Euro area supervisors on activities, on clearing activities, largely conducted in London now, and there are different elements that are currently under discussion, including materiality. Okay, now this is a long discussion that was also brought before the Court of Justice. The UK won the case. I think on the pure aspects of the legal aspects, I think it was rightly so. But again, I think that we are coming back on the fact that there should be proximity on oversight and supervision of the derivative clearing on the euro-denominated, and this is potentially triggering an important relocation of certain activities, okay, through CCPs that currently are established in London. Now, then the second aspect is, of course, the passporting and all the consideration that I've been making until now on whether you reinforce or whether you re-establish entities in continental Europe, what the legal status of these entities might be. I cannot exclude these to be just branches if you want to target one country. But otherwise, I think that subsidiarization, as Christos said before, I think it would be probably the most, let's say, important, because we will give access to the passport in all other European member states. And then we are already seeing other consequences. I don't know whether these are related or not, but we cannot prevent from doing the connection. The merger policy, I think, and particularly the fact that the merge of between the London Stock Exchange and the Deutsche Börse was stopped. I think at the Brexit, of course, the formal statement was different, was really driven by pure competition consideration, but to some extent Brexit did not help, and I would not be surprised if something similar would not happen in future. So these are elements. Keep in mind that it's already happening. Okay, it's already happening. To conclude, a few words, because Christos already mentioned these on his remarks on the impact on financial supervision. Fully agree on the fact that both sides of the channel we will continue to, let's say, remain grounded on the international developments and the regulatory developments by the standards setters, both sectoral and cross-sectoral, like the Joint Forum. And we should not forget the fact that Mike Carney is the chair of the Financial Stability Board. How can you think that he's going to differentiate the UK from the standards that he is imposing to the entire world on how to best regulate the sector after the crisis? So that is another consideration that should be added to the ones that Christos brought. The second, impact on the SSM. I think that, I told you how the SSM is preparing itself, but there is this eye that I think is looked at what is happening outside the euro area, but still within the EU, from the perspective of having common standards. And I know that also the European authorities are particularly keen in establishing a common level playing field that would prevent a sort of forum shopping across the different legislation. The ESRB, I don't think it would be largely affected, except the fact that all the European authorities working on financial supervision or working in the financial sector will be completely left out of the perspective of the major financial center in Europe. And we will be less rich, we will be less good. Let's say we will be really in a worse position than we are now if you want to establish what are the contagious, let's say, factor of risk, for instance, on a macro level. And then on the impacts on the different European supervisory authorities, I have no doubt that EBA will have to relocate. Where I don't know. I know that there are discussions, but that is part of the post-Brexit environment. I guess that, this is already happening. The UK will diminish its strength and voice within these authorities, and probably they will start shortly, if they haven't already done so, to work at 27. Because there is a potential conflicts of interest that has already been raised between the in and the future out. And the last point is clearly the point of ensuring that the level playing field is respected, and that all these initiatives that are visible or sometimes invisible, conducted by national competent authority, do not go beyond the principle of the level playing field. And this forum shopping that is come with me, it's just to facilitate the first establishment from the administrative perspective, but does not really touch the principle and the foundations of how the financial, let's say, regulation should be implemented. So I think that these are the main impacts that I see on the financial supervision. But these are, let's say, still at the early stage. And the fact that the ECB took this workshop yesterday really starts setting the tone, but that will continue to evolve as the negotiations really are unfolding. Okay, so that's what my
Thank you very much, Dr. Comporti, for this very in-depth